5:30. We have a City Council work session. The date is Monday, June 1st, 2020 at 5:30 p.m. And I would like to hand it over to Mr. Bruton or Mr. Cobb. Mr. Bruton.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Honorable Mayor, Mr. Chairman, and council members. What we want to do tonight is go over a brief review of some of the things that we talked about last week, the impact on the current fiscal year, as well as the proposed budget for next fiscal year. By way of review, you may recall that one of the things that we discussed last week was the use of fund balance of $335,000, which was originally adopted at 9/30 last year. In addition to this use of fund balance, which was used to basically balance the budget last year, we also had carry forwards into the current fiscal year of $233,000 for items that were not complete and had to be completed in the current fiscal year. In addition to that, we also had to perform some roof repairs over at Riverside, and those Riverside roof repairs totaled about $346,000. So this number that started out at $335,000 last year is now about $914,000. So we've got a projected use of fund balance of $914,000 just based on the budget numbers from last fiscal year. Okay? Looking at the current projection for this year end, some of the things that we talked about that were very important is we developed two strategies, trying to set up some guardrails for best case scenario, if you will, and worst case scenario. The best case scenario yielded a loss of, for this current fiscal year 9/30/2020, of $727,000. The worst case scenario yielded a result of $1,119,000 loss, approximately. For illustrative purposes, we have included the worst case scenario to basically reflect and show the impact on fund balance as we carry forward into the next budget year. Some of the other things that we talked about is the main impact that we are experiencing right now is on this intergovernmental line item, which is where the half-cent sales tax and the state revenue sharing taxes exist. The impact for this fiscal year was roughly about $800,000 between now and the end of the year. And please remember that brought our revenues down to $27 million compared to $30 million of budget. Some other things that we talked about. If we can go down just a little bit, Kelly, and take a look at the expenses. And we talked about the significant vacancy factor that we're experiencing right now in general government, police, and fire salaries, if you will. We are trending, as of right now, at about a $1.3 million vacancy factor, which will help us considerably between now and the end of September, which will, of course, help mitigate the use of fund balance of $914,000 and the loss of the half cent and the state revenue sharing numbers. In addition to that, we've challenged all the directors, and they're responding to control this line item right here, operating expenses. Cut where you can, hold off where you can. If you don't need to do it, please don't do it. So another thing that we're very concerned about, too, is this, go back up, Kelly, I forgot one critically important thing. We're also concerned about the impact on this other revenue line item right here. In other revenues, that's where our interest income lives for the city. Last year, we had about almost $300,000 in interest income. That interest income that we derive from other revenues basically goes right towards capital projects. Okay? Right now, we're trending, we budgeted the current fiscal year 2020, $125,000 in interest income. We will hit that number this year. We might even get a little north of that and achieve $150,000 in interest income. But going into next year, our projection is $37,500 in interest income, another major hit. And that's basically because the Fed fund rate has been reduced from 2.25, 2.50 at one point in time, now down to 0. It's a floating rate between 0 and 25 basis points. That's going to drive our interest income from 3.4% down to 10 basis points. So that's 0.034 to 0.001. And we're going to go, again, from almost $300,000 in interest income down to $37,500. That's what we are projecting for the next budget year. With that, I believe that is a pretty good recap of what we talked about, except for one other thing. Kelly, if we can go back to the expenses again. We also talked about the impact of government inflation on our general fund expenditures, being that there's numbers in here that we just can't control. We can't control the outcome of the police and fire union negotiation contracts that end up in these numbers year over year. We can't control the outcome of health insurance, and this year we're projecting a significant increase. We can't control workers' compensation, and we can't control general insurance. These are things that just have their own life and happen year over year. So we talked about potential mitigation strategy, which we'll get to later. So with that, that's a pretty good recap, I believe, of the major things that we talked about with each of you last week. And if I've missed anything, please let me know. With that, looking at the bottom of the schedule, again, we're projecting worst-case scenario a loss for this fiscal year of $1,119,000. When you take that out of the year-ending CAFR balance of $9,176,000, that gives us an ending result of $8,057,000. This is what we expect to start off with next year, okay, based upon our worst-case scenario. Now, one of the things I said to us last week is no matter what we do in developing these numbers, we know that we're going to be wrong. We just don't want to be way wrong. And way wrong meaning we don't want to end up north of that number. Anywhere south of that number, I'll be happy. Anywhere south of the $727,000 best case scenario, I'll be happy. But we don't want to end up north of that number. So again, this number will be our beginning balance as of 10/1/2020 for the 2021 fiscal year as of the current projection. So how do we match up against the GFOA best practices of 16.67% and our own internal policy of 15%? Again, GFOA best practices yields a balance of $4.8 million, internal policy $4.3 million. So you can see, as of the end of this fiscal year, we are still way north of those numbers. Okay? So how did the current budget kind of pan out? What did we do? Looking at the revenue projections for the next fiscal year 2021, remember last week we started off with a projection from the Seminole County Revenue Appraiser's Office of about 4.1%. Late Wednesday afternoon, we got revised numbers. The numbers panned out for the general fund to be 5.4%. and 5.18% for the CRA. So very surprised by those numbers, very good outcome. That's yielding a $725,000 increase in ad valorem revenues for the next fiscal year. Looking at the utility tax line, we're holding steady, the same as the current fiscal year. Remember our discussions last week, that's where the electric utility taxes live. And we're very concerned about where those are going to land, trending out from the impact of COVID-19. The same thing for licenses, permits, and fees. That's where the utility franchise fees lives. So there's a direct relationship between what happens here and what happens here in those two accounts. Looking at business tax receipts, we're projecting right now a decrease of about $14,000. We don't anticipate coming out of this the same way we went into it with $140,000 in projected business tax receipts for next fiscal year. We expect there to be some fallout as a result of COVID-19. Looking at intergovernmental, again, this is where the state revenue sharing and the half-cent sales tax exist, the two major components of this line. We are projecting right now a decrease of $920,000 in that line. Remember our discussions of last week. We know we had a very steep fall in the month of March. As of March 15th, there was a nosedive in economic activity. We don't know where that nosedive bottomed out at. We don't know how long it's going to be at the bottom, and we don't know how it's going to trend back up. You might recall the graph that we looked at last week in the gray area. So this represents our best guess right now what the gray area impact is going to be for next fiscal year. Looking at charges for services right now, we are anticipating a decrease of $176,000. That's directly attributable to two items: a decrease in projected ambulance transport fees, and also we've been advised from Seminole County Sheriff's Office that we've lost our 10th funding for our 10th SRO floater position. Okay. Fines and forfeitures, we're expecting those to come in the same way. Other revenues, kind of talked about that already. That's where interest income lives, and that's going to be the reduction over the current budget of $125,000 in that line for the current fiscal year. Use of fund balance. As of this time, we are not bringing to you any use of fund balance. We want to see how these numbers mature over the next month or so. But please remember, policy limits us to 3% of revenues for a use of fund balance. Okay? Any questions about revenues? Revenues are coming in at $29.3 million compared to $30.1 million for last year, or a reduction of about $800,000. Looking at the expense side, right now we have programmed in a 3% increase for general government salaries. Okay? General government being HR, development services, finance, IT, recreation, the city manager's office, and so on and so forth. As a placeholder, 3% for the police. We are currently up for union negotiations this next year. We don't know what the outcome of those negotiations are going to be. So that yields a $170,000 increase. Fire salaries is based on their current contract, and their current contract calls for a $343,000 increase. Looking at overtime as of right now, we are projecting a slight decrease just based on trends. So, overtime is kind of a tough call. We don't know how that's going to trend out from year to year, but right now that's what it's looking at. Health insurance, we talked a lot about that last week. Unfortunately, we had a really bad claims experience month in the month of January this past year. That's in the actuaries' projections, unfortunately. That number came in north of $600,000. Normally, we average between $190,000 and $200,000 in claims expense per month. So that's driven that number up substantially, and I'm hopeful that that number will decrease between now and the end of the budgeting process, and we'll be able to bring that number down a little bit. Workers' compensation. The direct impact on workers' compensation is related to COVID-19. In discussions with our broker, we have been advised that COVID-19 is having a negative impact on this line of workers' compensation. It's a nationwide issue. Looking at the vehicle replacement fund, we're trying to hold that steady, the same as last year. And the thing we don't want to have happen to us organizationally is we don't want to go back in to that problem where our fleet is outdated and we're spending more in maintenance expense than we are in vehicle replacement. So we're hopeful that we can keep that number in there. We won't know that until we get further on in the budget process. Looking at general insurance, again, general insurance, one of the things that we talked about last week is that there is a significant negative impact to property insurance due to all the significant events that have happened worldwide, hurricanes, cyclones, wildfires, and et cetera. So much so that some of the carriers have actually pulled out of the market. So when the carriers pull out of the market, what that's done is that it has reduced the market's ability or available capacity to provide insurance. That in and of itself has driven insurance rates up. Looking at operating expenses, what you need to know is that we talked to each one of the individual directors in the general fund, and we challenged them to provide us reductions, and they did. They came through for us, yielding a reduction in operating expenses of $171,000. Looking at the capital side, right now there's nothing budgeted in the general fund for any type of capital expenditures, bare bones. Reserve for contingency. The reserve for contingency, we increased by $50,000 because we know as a result of this line right here, something is going to crop up somewhere that's going to need to be taken care of. So with that, that gives us a total expense budget of $31.2 million compared to last year, $30.4, or an increase of $766,000. Compared to our projected revenues for the next fiscal year of $29.3, that yields a net operating loss of $1.8 million. Any questions so far? Okay. Going down and looking at transfers in, transfers out, and transfers out debt. Transfers in has been reduced for a couple things. We need your approval to take the GO bond millage rate savings and include that into the general fund operational savings. So we have to back that out until you approve it. We also backed out the CRA contribution for the debt service associated with OTP until we gain consensus on to include that. Unfortunately, we also backed out about $53,000 in anticipated building revenues, which is basically a transfer between the building fund and the general fund every year. We don't know what the activity is going to be for the next fiscal year. As that number becomes more granular, we'll take a look at potentially, increasing this number here. Transfers out transfers out decreased $275,000. And you may or may not recall, but last year we transferred out $275,000 to the Facilities Maintenance Fund to basically do capital facilities maintenance around the city. We used up almost all of that this fiscal year. Okay? That money's not available to do the same thing this next fiscal year. Looking at transfers out debt, transfers out debt decreased by $141,000, and that's directly attributable to the payoff of the Siemens lease for this next fiscal year. Taking into consideration transfers in and transfers out, that leaves a net operating result before impact from selected options of a $1.5 million loss. Any questions so far? Okay. Looking at impact from selected options, these are the things that we discuss with you year over year, and we basically ask you, again, do we have your approval to take the GO millage rate savings of $21,000 and put that over into the general fund millage rate? So I'm asking whether or not we have your approval to do that for this fiscal year.
Do we have
Yes.
I think that's been our historic agreement, is to keep the millage rate the same, and if we reduce the GO bond number, that goes back in.
Keeps it level.
Mm-hmm. Does everybody agree? Do we have consensus?
Do you understand that, Judith? Do you know what that is?
I think from the discussion that I had with them, I think so, but say it again for me.
If our debt obligation decreases, rather than lower the millage rate, we say the debt obligation and the millage rate will be the same number every year. So if one goes down, the other one can go up slightly, the total stays the same.
So kind of how it is we were supposed to have temporary additional millage, and it was supposed to eventually go away. So instead of it going away, each year the forever millage is going up. It's inching up every time. So that's essentially what's happening.
So another way to say it is if we had no debt, the 5.3 millage rate would be millage rate. But Historically, what we did way back when is we added debt, so our total millage rate was the 5.3 plus the debt was up to 5.8 or something, if I go back to my chart. We made a decision to say, no, the two of them should add up to that 5.3, because that is historically, going back as far as I can go, what the city millage rate has always been. So that was our goal, is to always keep that total the same.
And that's since your tenure, which is how many years?
14.
14. Okay. So,
We've, when I got on, it was a lot higher, and we've steadily tried, we went too low at one time. We cut into the bones, the way I term it, and it didn't work. We were going to lose services or capability. So we slowly raised it up to where that is the steady state now.
But didn't Charlie Crist at one point, I think it was in 2010, he said, y'all got to slash you need to hold your millage rate or steady, or explain to me why. I don't remember exactly how the conversation went, but...
I think what he said is you have to lower your rate, which you really didn't. There are other cities that didn't lower their rate, but we did. We lowered our rate from whatever it was down to
whatever he said.
10%, and it really hurt. I will tell you, it was a tough year for a long time.
Okay.
thank you.
All right, so I think we have consensus that we'll roll that.
And one more thing, staff has to know have a stable idea what their budget's going to be. So if we're raising and lowering things, it's very difficult for staff to figure out how to operate this place.
Okay.
We've told them, you know what you're going to get, go work within it. That's what they've done a very good job of over the years.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Right. Excuse me. We've tried to stay within that overall millage rate, combination of 5.28. The next question I want to ask is there consideration for continuing to ask the CRA for the debt service contribution for OOTP, for the completion of OOTP for the next fiscal year?
It does not appear there's a way to balance the budget without it.
It would mean deeper cuts somewhere, and you're absolutely correct at this point.
And
Right.
we've been doing that since the CRA started, haven't we?
Pretty much, yes.
I still don't like it.
Well,
But it appears from some of the documentation sent that this has been vetted again, and it's
Yes.
it's not the best scenario, but it is what it is.
Right.
permissible.
In addition to that, we'll be asking the CRA to fund the work that the city staff does on behalf of the CRA. Okay.
We've been doing that.
Yes, year over year. That's,
And that one, without doubt, I think, falls under CRA rules.
yeah.
Right. Okay.
Okay, with that, with those discussions, that brings back this use of impact from other items, 275, 383. Again, those still need to be approved by the CRA as well, but that leaves us with a projected impact of $1.2 million loss for the next fiscal year. Excuse me, carrying that down to the rolling forward of the current year impact, 2019 CAFR, 2020-21 impact, that yields a result of $6,787,510 as an ending fund balance for the end of 2021. We still meet the target balance of 16.67% at $5.2 million, and we still meet our internal policy of 15% at $4.6 million. But as you can see, the margins in these numbers are getting very small. And that is something that concerns me very deeply. Because as you know from our previous discussions, we've talked about having the funds available to withstand the impact of a significant weather event or any other anomaly that may come forward. So I'm very, very concerned about that.
That's actually a pretty good news that we're in this position, that we even have that kind of margin.
Yes, it is. I would agree.
So Back in the day, we were much closer to that number when we were trying to dig out of the hole.
Back when I started, I think this number was 2.3 million.
Yeah.
And we were actually below our policy by a couple percentage points. So you're right. This is a very good position to be in. We wouldn't be in this position had it not been for the fiscal performance of this past fiscal year and the 2 previous years before that. However, I am very concerned about the downward trend, because not only do we need to consider the impact of this year, but we also know that COVID-19 has the potential to impact fiscal year 21-22. The current economists are not are not forecasting a recovery until the second quarter 2022. So we know that more of that gray area is going to slide into the subsequent fiscal year. So not only do we have the impact to consider this year, next year, but also the following year. And we have to be careful what that impact is going to do to this number, again, in relation to any kind of a significant weather event that may impact us along the way. Because as we know from our experience, it takes 2 to 3 years to recover any funds from FEMA. It's a long, tough, arduous process. And if we take monies out of fund balance here, we won't see them until this year or maybe even the year after. So that's the danger that we face. So one of the things that we talked about last week, Kelly, if we can go back up. Again, I'm very concerned about this beast in these numbers that we talked about, with the ongoing costs of public safety, health insurance, workers' compensation, and general insurance. Is there a way to mitigate the impact of that ongoing increase year over year? And the only way that I can think of to do that is to develop an alternative revenue strategy. And one of the things that we talked about last week was doing a study a feasibility study, if you will, to possibly set up a fire district here in the city of Oviedo. So it's not a promise to do a fire district. It's a look at the feasibility of establishing a fire district here in the city. The numbers that we could gain from the establishment of a fire district would help us in 2 ways. It would help tame this beast right in here and free up other resources to cover the remaining things within the general fund. It would also allow us to take a look at the overall millage rate for the city and offset that with any potential increases that would be generated from the fire district. Okay? But again, we are looking for alternative revenue strategies. Very concerned about that. You'll recall 2 or 3 years ago, we were highly concerned about the implementation of the third homestead exemption. That third homestead exemption posed a significant threat to us here at the city. We were looking at alternative revenue strategies back then as well. One of them was the lighting district. Another one was the fire district. Because that initiative was defeated, we didn't move forward with the fire district. But still, that threat is out there, and you can see, if we go back up, Kelly, to the top of the revenues, you can see the impact on this line right here. It doesn't have anything to do with the third homestead exemption, doesn't have anything to do with home rule. It's just an economic impact. And so we've got to look at a way to mitigate and solidify our revenue stream so that we don't have these kind of impacts going forward. It gives us another tool in our toolbox and helps us survive the storm, so to speak, the financial storm. So what I'm asking for your consideration tonight and your approval for tonight is to give us consensus, if you will, to move forward with a study for the fire district. A study only. Not the implementation of a fire district, but just the study. And if we gain your approval, we will move forward with that with a projected implementation date, if approved, for fiscal year 21-22. Won't be this current fiscal year, it'll be the following fiscal year. And as you know from going through and looking at the lighting district, there's a number of methodologies that can, ways it can be done, a number of considerations along the way, and all those can be vetted throughout the process. But again, we're seeking your consensus to move forward with a fire district study tonight.
What sort of cost are we looking at for something like that?
I would say, based upon our discussions before, a couple of years ago, between $25,000 and $30,000.
Because I'm looking at a number right here, and we can project out what the contracts require, what are the needs of the department. It seems like we can back that into a millage and just say, look, this is your portion, and that we could perhaps just skip paying $30,000 if we, is it permissible for us to set a millage using those sorts of criteria?
Absolutely. But again, one of my concerns, and we talked about this a couple of years ago, and I believe you were on council then, one of my concerns is that the state is maneuvering municipalities and counties into a position where they totally consume their entire available millage rate, i.e. 10 mills.
So the other day, for anybody who may be watching this online, all of us met individually with accounting and finance staff. So when I keep saying the other week, that's what that's in reference to. But we had talked then about the only way I'm comfortable with this is the only way I was comfortable with the streetlight district, and that is for it to be millage and for it to be then subtracted from the general millage, and then you separate them for forever, but not be like tweaking back and forth. It sounds like you're talking about switching it to a fire fee and not...
The fire assessment fee, yes.
Okay, that's like a totally different universe than I thought we were anticipating.
Because if we, like Mr. Boop was saying, if we keep it as a millage rate, then it gets included in the overall millage rate towards that 10 mills. And so if you get, we're far away from that, but if for some reason you're a city and you get backed up against the wall to that, and you have another situation where there's another homestead exemption that kicks in, and you can't cover it anymore. In this situation, I agree with you on the part that it needs to be backed out of the millage, but we need to keep it as a individual, as a fee, similar to the street light, but dissimilar in the fact that I feel like we should subtract that piece out.
I forgot to say earlier, we did add the streetlight fee, and that could have been a millage rate.
It could have been. If it was millage, I would have been okay with it.
But we're trying to protect home rule here. And that's the threat coming down from the state with all these unfunded mandates and the tendency for them to want to control everything we do. And that's one way to do it, is if we max out our millage rate, they can tell us whatever we want.
We're 5.3, so we still have, we can almost double.
We could.
And
we're just trying to look over the horizon.
Well, the issue is that unlike the streetlight district, we needed those additional.
We need the money.
We needed those additional funds. This one, we're just trying to.
We also need the money. I mean, this is a way to raise taxes without feeling like a tax.
No, it's not. We're trying to maintain the fire, match the fire expenses with the revenues that go along with it, and that's kept in a separate fund now.
But the ultimate reason to switch it to a fee from a tax or from millage is to preserve the opportunity to then raise the millage or to adjust the fee for the purpose of generating more revenue. I mean, why do it if the idea is not for the purpose of generating more revenue?
It's to get away from a millage-based revenue.
To generate more revenue?
No, it's not to generate more revenue. It's to get away from a millage-based.
Then there's no point. There's no point to do it if we're not going to try to get more money out of it. It's great for oversight, and it's interesting.
To pay Peter what's due Peter, or Caesar.
Right.
If we've got a government inflationary situation that we can pay for without the millage rate, then we can do that. It'd be nice if we could do it for the police, but I guess we can't do it for the police department.
That's correct.
Right.
So we've been doing this with stormwater since the 90s, drinking water since the early 2000s, sewer since we bought it. We've made these other enterprise funds, and we usually there's a revenue to pay for it. In this case, it's going to be a fee to pay for it, whatever it is. The cost of protecting this city, we found out Friday, is well worth it. And it's not going to go down. It's only going to go up. Now, you would think that the property values would help offset that, but it's really not doing it. That's the issue.
And, excuse me, and Mr. Boop, is your nervousness regarding this issue because of what the state can require at some time?
Absolutely. The state has a lot of power. They do.
The homestead exemption is an example. That
Right.
cost us, what, $2 million?
That was a big hit. It was in excess of $1 million, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, it's like 1.2, I think.
But what if
It wasn't huge. I mean, that is huge, but yeah. It's smaller than 2.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but this is my overarching concern. What if they decide that they want to reduce this number to us? They've been playing around with communication taxes for years. Our communication services tax at one time was $1.7 million. It's now $1 million. Okay? So what's to prevent another decision down the road from being made to reduce these numbers right in here? The economy is doing that for us now, but what's to prevent the state from doing that to us in the future?
The state needs money, too.
Well, the state has also been looking at limiting what cities can do for fees and licenses. That's also been...
That's the other line up here. The state's been looking at eliminating this line right here, taking that away from us.
What, business receipts?
Yes.
It's been up for legislation year over year, and it's not made it all the way through.
But it comes back every year.
Yeah, so again, all this is another mitigation strategy. It's another revenue stream. It's another tool in your toolbox to be able to meet the needs of the city. That's all it's for. When you have total dependence on certain things, it creates, to me, a threat, okay? So the more you can mitigate the outstanding threats to you, the better your financial position is going to be in the long run. The other concern that I mentioned to Mr. Cobb the other day is sustainability. You know, we've got to develop a revenue strategy that will provide the level of sustainability that we need to have to meet the needs, not only today, but going forward. We can't survive year over year by cutting out capital expenditures. We can't do that. We can't survive year over year by telling the government employees, excuse me, I'm getting passionate now, that you're not going to get a raise this year because all the financial resources have been used up by everybody else. You know, we can't survive year over year by not funding the general facilities maintenance that needs to be done around the city. That's what we're doing to balance the budget. So we've got to develop a strategy to offset what's happening, you know, around the city. And this is what's happened year over year for the last 10 years.
Can we check out Urban 3? I know I've talked to at least some of y'all have seen the graphs, and I think it would be just eye-opening for our city to have it's this company out of North Carolina, and they take your tax rolls and they literally map it over the whole, they make like a 3D map of which places which earn the city money and what are drains. And it's so interesting, like all the roads are just dripping red. And it gets such an interesting perspective. And if we are considering doing something that's going to shift how revenue is acquired or increase revenue flows, I think we need to try to bring the whole community in on that and say, you know, here's what's costing this, here's the reason, and help them make, you know, over time, if we need to make decisions that perhaps decrease roads or narrow roads or different things like that, so we have less pavement to replace, then there's, you know, it's going to be like a 30-year lead time for people to wrap their brains around, oh, well, in 30 years, this road that I paid an impact fee for has to be completely rebuilt because that's how roads work. So instead of rebuilding the road at 40 feet, which is required now, maybe it could be rebuilt at 35 feet and save whatever worth of base and everything else as we rebuild it. But that's something that we'd have to think about way, way ahead of time and try to get people to wrap their brains around now. I wish I should have brought an example of that. Let me see if I can find one on here real quick.
Just Google it.
Is Urban 3?
That's a good idea, but I'm not sure it plays today. I think I asked this the other day, but how, there's a wide demographic in the city with a lot of people that have been here for a while. They've got advantages of homestead exemption and save our homes. Then you have people that move in from out of state, and I call it the pay-to-play tax. They have to pay full millage rate with no homestead exemption and no save our homes. They buy a $500,000 house, they pay the full taxes on it. How would the fire district help those people? If it's a fixed, let's say, a $500 fee versus paying full millage rate on that?
Well, they would benefit from whatever the millage rate reduction would be on their property.
Okay. I don't know if it's a one-to-one savings, but over time, maybe it would help with the initial impact if the millage rate is lower for those folks.
It depends how it's modeled out.
Okay. And I think we discussed, it seems logical to reduce the millage rate to offset the fire district, but I'm not sure we can do a one-for-one. Can we?
I don't think so. Okay, and the reason I make that statement is because we've got to take care of the beast that's in these numbers. We've got to develop margin. The city survives on margin, and if we don't create margin to survive on, then we're going to end up in the same situation for a different reason. So let's say, for instance, that the fire district equates out to a 2 mil reduction. So, and this is just an example, hypothetical. So instead of going down 2 mils, maybe you go down 1.85 or 1.75, and the remainder stays as a contribution to the general fund to cover that margin that is so desperately needed to maintain what needs to be maintained in the general fund.
So
That to me would be as a finance person, that would be the strategy. But that's just an example. I don't know how the numbers would actually play out.
So I think we're raising taxes, but we're maintaining a low millage. Trying to.
It's just a way to make you feel better about paying more.
Well, we should just be honest about it. We were honest about it with the lighting district. That was a tax increase. We could have put it in the millage rate, or we could have made it a light district for $70 a year. It is what it is.
There's no lights near me. I mean, if the lighting district, if the same mentality is used for the fire as for lighting, that'll burn my hiney. If you're a resident and you have a big house and you're paying the same as somebody who has just a little one-bedroom thing, I mean, maybe there is a bigger fire risk there. I don't know, but
No, that's the other side of the story. I'm thinking about the guy that has a $500 house and he's paying millage rate on the full $500, and his next door neighbor has a house valued at $500,000, and he's paying a millage rate on the $200,000 of it because he's got Save Our Homes that he's been in there for so long.
Yeah, it's because the fair market value of the house doesn't necessarily equate to the assessed value for the tax rolls.
Right.
But that happens to anybody that moves into the state.
Right.
Right.
Regardless of, but the following year, they get their homestead.
They get their homestead, but they still don't
But it's
Then they're
based on
locked
the
into
higher
it.
amount.
Save Our Homes.
Yeah.
for a while.
See, I'm the example that Mr. Britton's talked about. I bought my house in 1989, and I've lived there since 1989. My market value is 3 times what my appraised value is from a tax perspective.
Right. Okay.
But we
So
can't
the-
fix that here. I mean, that might be something where the League of Cities needs to get involved and say, hey, this is really whacking us out.
Okay, so let's get back on point. The question on the table is do we want to spend the $30,000 to do the fire district study?
At this time,
Is there consensus?
I would rather us do it as millage now, because I don't think we're going to hit the almost at 10 mils spot anytime soon, and I think if it's coming down the pipeline, we will know that the state is, fixing to try to limit how we can create fees.
Well, I don't think we're going to do it for the 2021 budget. It would be more for future budgets.
21, 22.
Yeah, so fiscal year 22?
Right.
My only concern is with any legislative session coming up, that second wave of homestead could come into play. And if it does, it's going to affect us immediately. So if we don't take some strategy now, we're going to be behind. So I have no issue with looking at that possibility now, doing the study. It's something after the study we can always say, going to go with the millage rate or go with the fee, or do neither. But I think with the way the legislature has been operating lately, we have to look ahead and not wait for not be behind what they decide to do to us.
Right. Yeah, you want to be proactive rather than reactive.
And Mr. Chairman, I just want to ask the question when you were talking about offsets. Just to get it straight in my head, offsets equal mitigation?
Say that
Does
again?
offset, when you're trying to get, to create offsets in order to make the budget more manageable, can I equate that to the mitigation? That you're trying to develop strategies?
To get more money.
I guess those two words, when we use mitigation, can I use offset also when you're, because you use that term, offsets?
Right. Mitigation for me is to reduce the threat to government, to reduce the impact of the increase of what I call government inflation. I use the word offset, I believe, with the millage rate, meaning that if we reduce the millage rate, say 2 mils, because that's what we would be getting in for a fire assessment fee, maybe we don't reduce it a full 2 mils. Maybe we only reduce it 1.75 mils, or whatever the number is, because the remaining 0.25 will go to offset the increase in this government inflation in the general fund.
Okay.
Did I explain that better?
Yeah, I
Okay.
guess I love the word offsets because you're trying to develop a strategy so that we are not caught flat-footed, I guess. So to
Exactly.
speak. And so I have no problem with it. As a matter of fact, I would love to see a survey,
Study?
study, yes.
Yeah, study.
I'd like to see a study. I like information, so.
And it can be what we want it to be. There's no one methodology, but there's a methodology that may work best for this city if, in fact, it is implemented.
Okay.
But I like that. I mean, that struck a chord with me when you were talking about, again, developing offsets. Because of, again, things like COVID-19, something we never even thought of that's going to affect how we do business in the
Exactly.
future. So I like that. Thank you.
Well, it's yielding its ugly head here to us, that's for sure.
All right. All right.
If I could clarify, just to make sure the offset, so offset is saying instead of paying for the $4.6 million firefighter cost, a fire department cost, out of the millage, we're going to, quote, offset it by paying for it somewhere else with the potential to continue collecting that $4.6 million and use it for something else. So I'm just making sure that that's registering with you, Councilmember Smith.
That's not how I see it.
Yes.
Okay, everybody's on the same page. That's the idea, is we
So-
collect the same amount.
No.
I thought.
No, we're
Potentially, though, we could keep the
potentially.
millage the
That's
same,
not the
and then we have
intent
a...
But
Okay.
potentially we could, but that wasn't the intent.
But that's not what we're
Okay, but nobody's intending that. Okay, I'm glad to hear that.
Okay, so, all right. So
For some
is every-
people-
do we have consensus to go ahead with the study?
Yes.
Yes. Okay,
Thank you.
all right.
And with that,
And then I think we have another sheet in front of us that concludes the budget portion of it, but we have a sheet in front of us talking about, and there was an email that was sent out earlier today about the cutoff, how long we want to provide cutoff service, or or suspend cutoff service, I guess, for our utility customers. And Mr. Boop, I believe, sent out what some of the other cities are doing, and so this is one of those things where it's kind of a tough decision, but we have to come up with a kind of a date or a deadline when we want to start trying to recover I guess it's close to $250,000 now?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
$250,000 in uncollected fees, or uncollected utility billings right now. So,
I didn't get the email, but can you explain some of these? I'm looking at the total numbers. Are they cumulative across the top, or is it
Either-
monthly total?
Hold on just a second, let me get there. Across the top, you'll see the word cycle.
Yeah.
We do 4 cycles per month. COVID-19 hit in the second cycle in the month of March. So these are cycles that we bill on a cumulative basis. And if you look at the very top half, what you'll see is for cycle 2 in the month of March, there was an outstanding unpaid balance of $18,445. Now, if you go down below, that balance is $8,375. So we've made collections against that cycle 2 in the month of March that have reduced that number. So to understand this on a cumulative basis, what you would do is you would go down to look at the total dollars still due. We go back and we do what I call a recast every week and refigure what has been paid and what is still outstanding. So as of last week, our best numbers show us that we have approximately $232,000 outstanding attributable to the folks that haven't paid.
So it's the total still due is cumulative across those cycles, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And that's just adding them up, okay?
So they will come down week over week, but nonetheless, they will continue to rise over time. So the question that Mr. Cobb and I have been talking about is, how do we unwind this thing? When do we unwind this thing? What's the timing of doing it? How do we notify the public? We've got that taken care of, but again, once we do start unwinding this thing, there's going to be impact on all of us because of that. So we want to do it carefully, we want to do it correctly, and we want to do it right to minimize the impact on all of us, and especially the citizens. So with that, we were looking at perhaps the July 1st date. So if we were to start doing turnoffs as quickly as July 1st, we would have to get notifications out to the public starting this week. My concern is that we're still going to be suffering, our citizens are still going to be suffering the impact of COVID-19 all the way through the month of June and into July. So July 1st might be a little bit aggressive for us. What may be more palatable, even though it's going to increase these outstanding receivable balances, is for us to take a look at an implementation date of August 1st in lieu of July 1st. That'll give us plenty of time to get adequate notice out to the public. Hopefully, that will even stir some of them up who can afford to pay, that aren't paying right now, to bring their accounts current and reduce these numbers dramatically. Now, we don't know what the mix is out there. We don't know what the household issues are. We don't know where people stand. It's very difficult. There's no way for us to discern that. But if we come up with an implementation date of August 1st, my feeling is that that'll give us and our citizenry enough time to make whatever adjustments that need to be made along the way. But in addition to that, and we currently have a policy that says that if you're seeking assistance with an outstanding balance, we have you pay half down and the rest over 6 months. We need to look at relaxing that. And what's the definition of relaxing? I don't know yet. I can't make the right representation to you now. But as an example, I would say maybe 25% down and the rest over 9 months. The concern is the longer you go out, the greater the risk. And the biggest risk lies in those folks who are not homeowners, okay? Homeowners, we have ordinances in place that allow us to lien property. So we will eventually get whatever is out there unpaid. But the other pieces, there's no guarantee. So when you look at these numbers, you can see how they're broken out between the different types of ownership, the extreme left-hand column. And so you can measure what the risk is out there by what we're looking at currently. So, with that, if there's consensus, Mr. Cobb, if you're okay with this, I would suggest an implementation date of August 1st and starting to inform the public now so that we give them time to make the appropriate adjustments going forward. So, again, one of my other concerns, I was talking to Mr. Chudnow at length about this today, is I'm hopeful that the minute we don't implement this thing, that we don't have a hurricane and have to turn it off again, But that's the risk of what we do, right? So,
Do we have enough cushion in that fund to have this continue to grow?
yes, we do have enough cushion. There's enough cash. I mean, basically, this impacts 3 different funds. What you have before you tonight is primarily the utility. That's where the big numbers are. It also impacts the solid waste fund, and it also impacts the stormwater fund. I've not done those analyses because this is where the big dollars are. The one will affect the other, okay?
Is it, how many accounts do we have in the city? Somewhere around 10,000?
13,500 roughly.
This is like 420 people.
The numbers across the total number, is that cumulative? Because if I add them up, it's about 1,000 across the box.
Yeah, it's on a cumulative basis, it's 1,000, but I don't know what the mix is month to month.
Yeah, I'm just adding the numbers, so it's about
It may-
10% of our
It's probably
accounts are...
it's probably like repeating across there,
It's
right?
about 10% of our accounts, roughly?
On a cumulative basis, yes.
Okay. And what's it normally?
I don't know the right answer to that question. Not much. It's not bad. We have really good collections here. We have a very solid city, and the citizenry here is very responsible.
Okay.
I think that the August 1st, as we discussed earlier, would give that time for people who, and I'll be generous, who may be able to pay but are taking an opportunity not to pay, to be able to catch up with that month, that almost 2 months' notice. And also, as we discussed earlier, some type of process, so if someone is in dire need because of the COVID-19, some process to bring that forward for the quarter, and I would go with 6 months, but then grant on an individual basis, maybe the 9 months, depending. And again, I know that's subjective in a sense, but having that capability to be able to bring in the funds that we need to run the utility, but also have that empathy for people who are...
Absolutely. That's what I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about the city displaying the appropriate empathy to meet the needs of the citizens.
So, do we have consensus on the August 1st date?
I like
Bring
that.
back- Okay, and then the other piece of the question is the policy stating half down and then paid over 6 months. Did we want to relax that policy, or did we want to just keep that policy in place?
I think that's a reasonable policy. That's a long time.
There's a...
And if somebody's truly
I
in
don't know how you do
need,
it case by case, but that seems reasonable, but there may be some extreme cases.
but people will step up to help. That's the thing. If somebody's truly in need.
Yeah.
Well, and I do think that people who have been taking advantage of the situation, and maybe I'm just a little, maybe it's 43 years, I don't
Cynical
know.
there, Jeff?
Maybe. But those who have been taking advantage, giving them that time, knowing that,
Enough time to plan your budget to get current.
or to
Take off.
use that discretionary, well, and that's what Mr. Boop and I discussed, it's the rental homes and the apartments and the commercial, especially if they're leasing the commercial space,
Correct.
that you just fold up and go and it's just gone.
Right.
Do we put liens on those types of accounts?
If we can. We can't lien rentals, we can't lien homeowner rentals, but if there's a business that has assets, we can try and lien those.
Okay. All right, so it sounds like the consensus is not to relax the policy, to keep the policy where it's at. Is that, are we good with that?
And just to let people know, they are handing out, they have a list of places that do assist with people who are having difficulty. So there's mitigation. Can I use that word for that?
I'm sorry?
There's mitigation here.
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
exactly.
Yep. Okay. All right. And I have one last item to discuss. I know it was supposed to be a short meeting, but next week, the county commissioners are voting on, I guess, yeah, it's next week, the county commissioners are voting on the bear management area, and I'm sure a lot of us have received emails regarding that area.
The what area?
The bear management area.
Oh, okay.
Have you received some of the emails on that and correspondence and talking to people? The biggest area of complaint that I've heard is the bringing out the trash cans, no sooner than 5 in the morning.
Yes.
And then with the way our collection is, a lot of people, it gives them a short window.
Yes.
And then there, I believe there's also in the management area that you have to have those cans back in
Yeah.
at a certain time. So there's that window issue. But also, the way it's written, or the way that I've seen it, is the management area is from 417 east. East of 417. Everything that I remember discussing was always either from the river or from Lockwood. East of the river, east of Lockwood. And that seems to be the most concentrated area that there's been encounters. So my thought is if we still want to be included in the bear management area, and one of the benefits of it is that we can also work with the county on their grants, on their grant program, in order to provide bear-proof cans for those residents in those areas. That was kind of the benefit, or kind of what we were looking at when we were looking at the bear management area. But I feel like the boundary needs to be further east than 417. It's, either at Lockwood or at the river. And the rest of the area, I was talking with Mr. Kelly earlier this week, and what they've done in some of the northern areas is they've created like a warning area, because basically if you clamp down in a certain area, there's not the likelihood, but the possibility that the bears might migrate into the other areas, looking for food, and then we can reassess at that time. So my thought process is if we want to be included in the bear management area, at least possibly ask the county to put it at Lockwood and the river. So I was trying to get some discussion on that, because it is going to the county, and I'd like to provide staff with some sort of guidance, and the county with, kind of what we want to do. So with that being said,
Is anyone tracking the bear population and their migration patterns? Because I've only heard of one sighting near me, and it was not in the city. It was over off of Old Lockwood, and that's been months now. That's the only one I've heard of. And that was recently, but it was over off of Old Lockwood.
I know they had a sighting in Sanctuary today. It was posted on Facebook.
It'd be nice to know, are there a lot of bears, or is it, a small group that's moving around?
Well, and then there's also the different personality of different pockets of town. Like over where I am, there's a bear that occasionally comes and eats out of the trash can at the Sunoco station. Like, I'm on 426, and there is a bear there, and it's gone and messed with Parks Wilson's bees on Lake Charm Court. And it's been there's been bear scat found off the trail in some of the Hillcrest homes, where Cindy Drago used to live, actually.
Well, it
So
seems
they're
like,
all over. In that,
Yeah, in most of the cases, they're eating birdseed. Is there going to be a regulation to have people bring their birdseed in?
that is included, yes.
It is?
Yeah, and if you have fruit trees, the idea is to try to pick your fruit so you don't have rotting fruit there, because
Yeah.
they'll eat that too.
Okay.
But I think we can address a lot of this stuff with our next trash hauler. So if the county were to not implement it immediately, but instead wait till October 1, the bear can mechanism will be on the truck. We can, as we're negotiating, try to push it past. 5 a.m. is really early. If it were, you don't start picking up until maybe 8 o'clock, or I don't know what a reasonable time would be in that industry. But there's other ways to work around that.
But I still don't feel like, I still don't feel like there's the encounters on this side of Lockwood, on this side of the city, the encounters are extremely minimal to where we shouldn't, for lack of a better word, penalize this side of the city when their encounters are so minimal, when the area of concern is on the east side over, east of Lockwood or east of the river. That's where we've really had the encounters at.
But I think they're just not fussing. Like, it never occurred to me to report the bear, and I don't think it occurred to Parks to report his bear. I think everybody just is like, oh, there's bears, and nobody thinks
the same bear? Is it Yogi Bear?
We
or
don't
is it
know.
Yogi
Yeah.
But so the question I have is, do we want to? Well, it sounds like what you're saying is possibly to ask the county to table this until we can address this with the waste hauler.
Oh, no, I wouldn't say table it. I would say negotiate based on bears being here, because they are. They're down Pine Avenue. They're all in that core. But between Lockwood and 417, there are bears. But 417, I remember when it was built, it's impassable. If you're a wildlife creature other than a bird, you're not going across that big old thing, because there's fences, there's retention ponds. It's just really difficult to pass that. But Lockwood and the Econ River, you just swim across it. Bears can swim. So there's issues on the west side and the east side of the Econ.
I know of the Sunoco. In my neighborhood, we've had one, but it occurred, and we haven't seen anything since. They're gonna wander. But the issue is do we want to put these regulations on every household in Oviedo east of 417, or do we want to concentrate on the area where we've got the highest concentration, which is east of Lockwood or east of the river?
Mr. Chairman, I wasn't familiar with the ordinance until I saw something on Facebook about it. And then what I saw what the restrictions were, that I had to take my garbage out at 5 a.m. That's dangerous for me, because I live on a major highway. And what really, the new restrictions, when you all start having us take it, I couldn't leave it out the night before, because I had a friend who would do it for me the night before. But if you're saying that I got to get up at 5 a.m., because they usually come and get the trash about 6, the garbage truck comes. And so I'm 65 years old, and it's dark, and I'd be near a major highway, and you're going to put that restriction on me. And so I took it personally, and I just said in my head, I'm just going to be breaking the law, because I'm not going to put my trash out at 5 a.m. I put it out the night before, because that's safest for me. And what I do is I put I put vinegar on top of it as a smell deterrent, and hopefully that will deter it. But for my safety, I'm not going to do it. So I may be out there breaking the law.
Well, that's what a lot of I've heard too, is you have older people who have people do it for them. Some of the other things that I ask questions on is, what's the problem, the concerns I've heard was the enforcement. You know, one of the things someone asked me, do we have watches so they know when the 5 o'clock comes? But if you're going to enforce it, what's the enforcement? Is code going out at 5 in the morning to enforce it? Are you going to ask the officers to go out and enforce can being out at 4:55 instead of 5? And if we're not going to have active enforcement, and what I've heard is that the county does not actively enforce this, I'm a firm believer is don't put it on the books if you're not going to enforce it. And that's a lot I heard was, am I going to get a fine for putting my garbage out?
So, my garbage is out anyway, because it's outside the house. What's the difference between sitting next to the house and out on the street?
Well, if
Well,
it's
it's
sitting by your house, and my garbage is sitting outside, we don't have a garage. So we've
Well,
got...
by that, you couldn't leave it outside.
Well, we've got bear straps, though. So if you've got bear straps, what we do, because I don't like to get my clothes dirty, I pull it out the night before, and then Paul, as he's leaving, he unhooks the straps. So there's ways around it if you
I like
just
the vinegar.
decide you're going to
You don't like vinegar?
try to give it a go.
We always did that when I was growing up. We had I was growing up and we knew there were wild animals, especially dogs. We had a problem with dogs. We put vinegar or ammonia in the bag, and that appeared to deter them because we'd have just garbage all over the place, but it appeared to deter them. So I said, what the heck, you know?
Thank you, I've learned something.
Okay.
I'm going to try that.
And I do what you do. I've got the bear straps on my garbage can, and I keep my garbage can on the side of the house behind a little fence so that I'm compliant with my HOA. And but I take them when before this whole quarantine thing. You know, when I would leave for work, I would unclip those and head off to work. But the problem is even if you had those, you know, for instance, in your situation, you get the garbage out there, but you still got to go out at 6 in the morning on the busy highway and unclip the clips.
I ain't gonna do that. It's dark, there are massive trucks going by.
Right.
They would, I mean, it's either the bear, we protect the bear, or my life. I'm protecting my life. So I'm sorry if I start racking up fines if you go ahead and pass me. I'm not gonna do it.
Right. So the question is how do we want to, is there,
What's the county say? Is it going to...
from what I understand, the county will do what we ask them to do. I believe Winter Springs said they didn't want to be in it. The county said fine. The county is not, the county's doing what we asked. We approached the county as a city to ask and to be in the bear management area. Because of the situation that was happening on the east side of town. And then all of a sudden, I got taken back when I saw that it went all the way to the 417. Because I know at one point it was a river and another point it was Lockwood.
What if we do it east of the river and see how that works, and then if they migrate into the urban area, we go back and say, well, maybe we need to include the urban area.
And basically put everything west of the river in the warning area, and then we can adjust it. The warning area, there's no fines. It's just letting people, kind of putting people on notice that, hey, you know, you still need to do something because these bears, when we clamp down on this area, these bears are going to want to migrate or want to seek other food sources.
Yeah. I'd say go with the river and see how it works.
It's been a long time since anything on Facebook or any sightings have been over in the Live Oak Sanctuary area.
I spoke to Drew because Drew is the Live Oak president, and then he also manages the sanctuary. He seems to think that the encounters are similar. It's just that they get posted more on the sanctuary's page. But the encounters seem to be similar in Live Oak and Sanctuary, and in Riverside they have encounters as well over in there.
Yeah.
I also spoke to the Riverside president, HOA president, and just kind of spoke to him a little bit to try to just get some feedback, to hear what their residents are feeling, towards this, and, have they heard anything different, and to just see, are they having encounters, do they have issues? And I think the biggest issue is the time that they can put the can out versus when the garbage is collected. So if we limit it to a smaller area like that, then possibly we can address that with the waste hauler and find out if maybe that part of the route can be later on so that they have more time to get their cans out in the morning. And then that being said, if they're bear-proof cans, you can put them out the night before. So if we can get into a grant program and then we've got that smaller area, then it's less households, it's less cans that we need to acquire through the grant program, and then we can possibly put those cans over there, and the rest of the city can be under the old, or not the old, but under the normal restrictions until we, unless we have some sort of a migration or something. So that's my thought on how we should handle this situation.
Well, I met with Bob Delary about this back in January, and he was showing on a map where the bear encounters were before and after it was enacted on the western part. And I-4 was just this impenetrable boundary for them. And the thought with the county, it seemed, was that 417 would serve the same role here, that Winter Springs may be okay, and the bears will go like off to Chiliota or something, or at least not around the humans, if we go all the way from 417 over. And I believe that was coming from Mike Orlando. And I'm not a bear expert. I just know I've got my bear straps and I've seen a bear, and I think there's a method to their recommendation. And if we can address it in other ways, I'm with you though. Like, you can't get up in the middle of the night and
I'm not, but I could, but I'm not going to do it.
Yeah, and that's not an unreasonable position to have.
No, I'm not. I have too much going on in my life. I think after COVID-19, it seemed, when I saw it, I'm saying, oh, here we are, these poor people are not over COVID-19, and we want to restrict them more. Why? For what reason? When there may be other solutions that are not so, that we don't have to go to this extent. And so that's what's in my head. I mean, come on, at what point do we say enough is enough? We rely on people's maturity and say, okay, here's what's available. If you want to prevent bears from getting in the can, go ahead and do that. I mean, why do we have to make laws at this point? I guess I'm just...
Well, it gets us access to funding, right? I mean, I think that was the initial thought.
Again, we're still in COVID-19.
So
Think about
So
it.
is there going to be any funding available?
Are the neighborhoods that are east of 417 that are in Winter Springs, they don't consider them in Winter Springs?
East of 417.
Barrington Estate?
Barrington, everything on the north side of 434, east of...
I don't know, do you know where
that's
the
Winter
exact
Springs.
boundary? It follows the city boundary.
Yeah.
So all those homes that are on the north side of 434, they're not in danger of any bears because Winter Springs isn't going to opt in?
That's what...
And the
my
neighborhood that's
understanding.
partly in Coral Springs and partly in Winter Springs, the ones that are in Oviedo will have to do that, but the house across the street that's in Winter Springs won't have to do it.
Right.
That makes no sense.
Well, this gets back to Bob Delary's observations about what happened when they implemented it. So it was not originally everywhere. If anybody in the room knows more about this than me, please speak up. But I think it went something like this. It was implemented for a smaller area, and the bears kept on. They just moved one neighborhood over. They just kept going one over. But then when they got to I-4, like that was it. So when the boundary went all the way to I-4, that just seemed to be the end of it.
But
But it sounds like everybody just don't want to do it.
Well, no, I mean, I think there is a
Say,
problem.
make it
and-
the river and see what happens.
Yeah, I think there is a problem, and we've had this
Sorry,
discussion, but the problem, the main concentration of the problem lies east of the river, or east of Lockwood. It's more the river, though, because it's your Riverside, Live Oak, and Sanctuary tend to be the areas of the greatest encounters.
If we're going to do this, I would say make it the river, and then if we need to adjust, we can adjust.
And also, I would recommend it be not until October 1st, no matter where it is. So people who do not want to get up that early and have to worry about it can strategize.
But remind them that no one's enforcing it anyway, so.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Right.
So why are we doing it?
That's my point, Judy.
We got more, COVID-19.
It's for the funding source. It's for the funding source through the grant program.
COVID-19.
Well, we'll wait till October.
October 1. Start.
So are we,
That nailed down?
okay, so east of the river,
October.
October 1st.
All right.
I don't agree with that.
You don't?
I'm gonna go eat.
Okay. All right. That sounds good. That's all I had. Does anybody else have anything for the good of the order?
If we could all collectively come up with, and I sent it to Mr. Kelly and Mr. Cobb about this, some kind of statement from the city about all these riots that are going on. I feel like we should say something. I don't know what we should say.
I think we should stay out of
Stay
it.
out of it.
We don't have any riots
We don't
here.
have any here, but to
Right.
say, look, this is not acceptable. That's not how we play things here in
No.
Oviedo. That's not what we do.
I disagree. I think we should just, to me, we should just stay out of the riot situation. We don't have riots here. If we had riots, then that would be something, I feel like we would then interject, but we don't.
I draw attention to ourselves.
Yeah.
Valid point.
I mean, they had a peaceful protest in Sanford over the weekend. There wasn't riots, issues, I mean, those, that's absolutely fine. And I don't think we need to bring attention to it.
I agree.
You have a plan, right, Chief?
We always have a plan.
That's what I thought.
Change it on the day.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
We're a pretty tolerant community, and we are pretty peaceful, so
Right. So,
outsiders may come in, but we know how to, we have a plan. I'm just saying. I think a lot of this stuff, in some of these areas are, the people that are trying to be peaceful are getting overtaken by
That's
others.
very true.
right. Yeah. So, all right. Was that everything?
Mr. Deputy Mayor?
Yes, sir.
I do have one item.
Absolutely.
It's just to give you all a heads up on something. We were, speaking of this topic, we were contacted today. There is a resident who would like to do a peaceful demonstration in Center Lake Park on Saturday. We pressed for more details. It's more or less a march using sidewalks around the park and then ending at the amphitheater lawn, where they would then have a gathering there. One of the things that we have facing us, a challenge is that our resolution we adopted back May 18th, confirming all of our emergency management actions, actually said no special gatherings until August 31st. However, in light of that, I think that in this case, we shouldn't look at this as a social gathering, that it's something different, and that we should, since it's for an hour, they say that the organizers say that they want it to be peaceful. I think we should facilitate this, allow them to do it, and work through the police department, work through recreation and parks to make it so that they have a peaceful experience. And for that hour, obviously the concern is that if folks, as you said, outsiders show up and overwhelm those who have the good intention, that's something that we are concerned about. But we've...
The person who's making the request an Oviedo resident?
Yes. So, like I said, we want to coordinate with them and facilitate with them through police and through parks so that they do have a peaceful experience to that. And so we do have we have our concerns. And when staff first reached out, they were leery to give us details. And it wasn't until staff pressed and said, we need the details so that we can help you. I mean, if a lot of people show up, just giving you a special event issue. When a lot of people show up, they park at the Strand. What does the Strand do? They tow them. Well, that could easily be seen as the city doing it and could turn into something that it shouldn't.
Right.
So being able to sit down with them and discuss details, even the little things, so that we're able to provide them with a safe experience is important.
Make sure that they understand that, I guess it's Broadway is going to be cut off. So there's
Boardwalk. Yeah, that's another thing too. Boardwalk will be closed. So, but I wanted to give you all the heads up in case you get any phone calls about it. I believe that we shouldn't treat this as a social gathering. That we should treat it for what it is,
Right.
and try to give them the safest, peaceful experience that we can.
Absolutely.
So that was what I wanted. Just wanted to bring that to you quickly tonight, so that just in case you see something out there.
Right.
But we do want to try to help them.
Does anybody have any other, everybody good with that?
Mr. Deputy Chairman, I think we need to ask for any public comment. Since it's a public meeting, open the floor to any public comment.
Oh, okay. I'll open the floor to any public comment if anybody wishes to speak at this time. Yes, please. Do we have a mic?
How about the one Jerry used?
Yeah. There's a microphone right there at the end of the table.
Oh.
Okay.
Oh.
I'm not afraid of COVID, so
Okay. That's fine. All right. And we just need your name and address for the record.
Katrina Shaddix, 1133 Covington,
Yes.
Oviedo 32765, addressing the bear situation. There have been a lot of encounters in the area that you're not wanting to cover, but due to the FWC sometimes killing the bears, people have been very hesitant to report it. So what you'll probably see next week is Mike Orlando will have a record of all of the encounters. The FWC is good at that. So he actually knows more about people seeing the bears than we do. The reason why there's more coverage on that east side of town is because the Sanctuary and Riverside and Live Oak are packed with houses. So you see one bear, 200 people get on social media and freak out. Whereas in Black Hammock, a person sees a bear, it doesn't go on social media, but the bear is still there. And I have actually delivered a lot of the straps to people in Black Hammock, to people in, it's in the Black Hammock, that one neighborhood. It's a very new neighborhood on the corner of
Preserve.
across from Pappy's. I gave straps to all of them. They are some of the people that have not called in their sightings of the bears. They took care of it. It was great because we depended on ourselves and took care of it. We didn't require, money. I gave it to them free. They're the neighborhood that I set up this great little system for everyone that puts their straps on. They have a lot of nurses and people who work the night shifts who cannot get up or don't want to. Like, I don't want to get up at 5 in the morning, to put my trash out. I put mine out the night before. But what we created in that neighborhood is all of the people put the straps on their trash so it's secure. They roll it out at night, and then there's either dog walkers or exercisers that go and, before the sun comes up, and they actually unsnap the straps for their neighbors. So it's a great neighborhood effort, and we're going to get them a sign that says Neighborhood Watch program instead of Neighborhood Watch. But there's a way around it, like Megan was saying. As far as people getting tickets, that rarely happens. We're not going to punish people that don't want to take their trash out. And it turns into a neighborhood community effort where we can secure their trash, we don't spend taxpayer money, and we don't, punish people for not wanting to get up at 5. So all of the reasons that I heard from y'all have already been proven that we can get around it from the west side and different bear-friendly neighborhoods. So I would be happy to work with y'all on that, but when you hear Mike Orlando next week with the FWC, you'll see that Oviedo can and will be very successful at this without spending a lot of money, without offending citizens, and of course without killing bears and without making us get up at 5 in the morning to put the trash out, because that's crazy town. And, the whole new contract is going to make a big difference too. So I'm definitely interested in working with y'all on that. I will provide straps for citizens who can't afford them for free. I've already talked to the Alafaya Woods HOA where I live to get everyone retrofit, because we definitely don't want to spend money on trash cans. I don't know how y'all feel about that, but I know talking to the citizens, that's the main thing. Especially with COVID, no one, rarely anyone has $300 to just spend, and we certainly don't want to spend it on a trash can. So I will come in, provide those straps, we'll do the, the neighborhood thing, work together and get this done, and everybody wins.
Perfect.
So let me know how I can help.
All right, thank you, Ms. Janice. Is there anybody else wishing to speak? All right, hearing none, I'll close public comment. And with that, we've already gone over everything. We don't need to talk about future meetings at this meeting, correct? Okay, so with that, I will call this meeting adjourned.